This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com.
Alpha Natural Resources. Consistent with its running right process, Alpha is an energy company committed to being a leader in mine safety and an environmental steward. We fuel progress around the world. More information at alphanr.com.
The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Information at vachamber.com. Virginia hospitals and health systems provide jobs. They support our economy and promote public health. Local hospitals are always open to help people with unexpected health needs. Having a stable healthcare network is vital. Virginia hospitals are our lifeline.
It's amazing what my students with special needs can accomplish. Their pride is priceless. That's why I teach.
Brought to you by the Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and a very special welcome to Senator Emmett Hanger. Thank you, Emmett, for being with us. We appreciate it. It's been a while since you've been on This Week in Richmond, and we're having this conversation here in October.
Right.
And really, as the summer has ended and fall's here, and I'm sure it's beautiful over in the valley.
It is.
It's soon going to be time for the upcoming session.
Right. And it has been a while since we've talked, so
Yes.
I appreciate the opportunity to sit and chat a bit.
Well, I've been on your website and would encourage people to go on there. We're going to put it on the screen, but if they know how to spell Emmett and then how to spell Hanger with no space in between,
They got it.
then they've got your website.com. And to really go on there and they'll see some good paragraphs on different issues that are important to you. And without going through them A through Z, we probably wouldn't have time, but knowing the Valley as I do and you're representing them, agriculture came as your top one. How is it going in the Valley?
Well, actually, in general, it's been a good season, a good growing season for farmers statewide. We had good rains throughout most of the growing season, and now, in the latter parts of the harvest, a drought came up there, of course, pretty much statewide toward the end of the process. That hurt a bit, but not only just the weather, which is a big deal for agriculture, but the economic environment for agriculture in Virginia is on an upswing, on a very positive note. We've had demand for poultry, as an example, is on the upswing. The export demand for agriculture products is up. In fact, that's one of the things the governor likes to talk about, the competition that we have with our neighboring southern states, particularly North Carolina and Georgia, for our agriculture exports. And of course, we've surpassed North Carolina now, and we've got Georgia a bit out in front of us, but we're doing good in that respect. I think overall there are concerns in agriculture, particularly when you're going down through the ABCs, and I do that sometimes with the policy issues, agriculture, then the budget, and then conservation. And conservation and agriculture go hand in hand, really. And there are some issues out there, particularly in the agriculture sector this year, as we work to clean up the streams of the Commonwealth, particularly the Chesapeake Bay waters. And so that's one of the areas we're going to be looking at this year to continue helping farmers with incentives for best management practices, fencing livestock out of streams and things of that sort.
I say Shenandoah Valley because I know where you what part you represent,
Right.
but there are two other senators that are north of you that have part of that valley, and then
Right.
you go down the south. So tell our viewers the part of the Commonwealth that you're representing.
Okay. Yeah, it used to be the central Shenandoah Valley, and that was it, north and south.
Yes.
But now I live in Augusta County, so I have all of Augusta, Stanton, and Waynesboro. But the district has been pushed a little bit. I have a little more than half of Rockingham, and then I go east of the mountains over into Greene County, and then north up the 29 corridor, Greene, Madison, and Culpeper. So it stretches out quite a bit now with districts that some would call gerrymandered, but there's a community of interest really in that district. In the areas, particularly Madison and Culpeper, are agriculture areas as well, even though they're getting awfully close to Northern Virginia when you get on the outskirts of Manassas and Fredericksburg and parts of Culpeper.
That area of the Commonwealth's been home for you for some time. In fact, the viewers in the Valley should know, I'm not sure that all of our statewide viewers know, that you played basketball in early years at,
Right.
at Madison before it became JMU. And so you've been in that part of the Valley for some time.
Right, I've lived all of my life, away for military, and but I've always lived in that general area, and it's a great life there. Of course, the whole state is great, and I enjoy getting around in all parts of it, and I do frequently, particularly with some of the responsibilities I have now with the commissions and committees that I sit on. I tend to get around in all corners of the state fairly frequently.
Well, I think the last time I had an opportunity to see you, you were in Wise County.
Right, out of Big Stone Gap.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. So that.
Which that's a big deal now, though. A movie coming out this
is.
month there,
It's
focusing on that.
I haven't seen it, but it's out. It's out. I want to see that.
Yeah.
Our viewers too should know that currently you rank 8th in the Senate, having served in the Senate since 1996. You had a decade of serving in the House of Delegates back starting in the 1980s. And that after this upcoming election, and I say that because of seeing folks that have no opposition in November, that you'll be ranked 5th among the 40 senators.
That it should be.
And among the Republican senators, you'd be ranked 2nd in seniority. So
Right.
doesn't seem like you've been here that long.
No, no. At the end of this particular year, before as we convene the next session, it will be 20 years, which is going very quickly. But the seniority helps. I have a tendency to involve myself in a lot of different issues, pretty much across the board, and rising in seniority in my caucus. Of course, election's still ahead of us. Looking to hopefully control the majority, but have a number of leadership positions, and whether in leadership or not, whether Democrat or Republican control, I've found that I'm able to work with my colleagues, Democrat or Republican, statewide, to get the job done, and for me, that's what it's all about.
And it's probably something among the many things that distinguishes Richmond from Washington, D.C., in my opinion, that in Richmond, when it comes right down to it, after there's some partisan battles, things get worked out.
They generally do, although it has been a concern of mine over the last few years that the mentality and the operations of political partisanship that's been so obvious in Washington has been moving into Richmond, and we're seeing it more and more, and at the local level too, where we're kind of just got this partisan divide. If a Democrat thinks of it, it's automatically bad, and vice versa if a Republican thinks of it or has something. And we really have to work and get beyond that, and that's one of the things I'm hopeful to exert more energy in this year, recognizing that there are marriages, lots of marriages in the Commonwealth where one of the partners will be a Republican and one will be the Democrat, or one maybe just doesn't care as far as the politics are concerned, and to get along well. What you got to recognize is there are, you have to reach agreement at some point on the issues, and there shouldn't be just a Republican way or a Democrat way. There just needs to be a way to resolve issues that will provide appropriate services for the citizens of the Commonwealth.
That's a good example you use. And if people can work it out in their own home, in their own marriage,
right,
then we would expect legislators to be able to
should
work
be able
that
to.
out.
You would
Yes,
think, wouldn't you?
Yes,
You would think. So We really need not to look to Washington for our role models. There are none up
No.
there at this point in time.
No.
You know, I think we're at a point in our history again, I think, where it'd be good for Virginia to take the lead in a positive way.
I was at Mount Vernon recently, and there was a time you could look to Washington, George Washington, and to the Congress, and Virginia has its many heroes of those early days.
Right.
Well, let's go back to some of the other issues.
sure.
Another one that's in that list that you have is education, and I know that's something that's really been
Right.
important to you. As you look toward the upcoming session, education, what do you see around the horizon that you and your colleagues will be wrestling with and working with the governor on?
Well, on I think a positive note, we went through a period there where, and it was a national phenomenon, where we were on accountability. No Child Left Behind came about during the Bush administration, and I had been very much opposed to some of the fine print in the No Child Left Behind, which basically allowed the federal government to force some of what we were doing in education in the Commonwealth and other states. So we're backing, I shouldn't say backing away from that, but we're moving on. In other words, I think the pendulum swung too far with the accountability in terms of the testing process, in requiring teachers to essentially, you really have to say teach to the test, because there was a small defined body of knowledge students had to basically be able to regurgitate over the short term. We are not backing totally away from that, but I think we're moving in a way that will allow, hopefully, teachers more flexibility in the classroom, still looking for oversight so that we're getting appropriate results, and that we have a certain level of quality statewide in the educational process. But some of the attitudes that were prevalent over the last decade, I think we're softening a bit, understanding that the students need a broad base knowledge, that teachers need more autonomy in the classroom. So I'm hoping that will be the case. Funding is a big thing too. During the recession that we endured over the last, going back to 2007, 2008, we recognized that the state pulled back on some of the funding to local governments. And I know the governor's interested. I certainly am. Most of the legislators, I think, are interested in the state increasing our level of support for education at the state level, decreasing some of the disparities that we find in education around the state.
You know, when you talk about those tests that students have to take, the SOLs, very recently at a Virginia Chamber Workforce Conference, I heard one of the large employers in the Commonwealth say, we've never asked employees, what did you get on that SOL test
Right.
in your senior year? We want to know, can they think? Can they work as a part of a team? It's not what they got on a certain test. And I know you, as a leading legislator, and others are wrestling with that number of tests, because Virginia requires more than the federal government requires.
And I think we developed some consensus over the last couple of years. I had legislation that basically put an arbitrary figure out there, reduce it by 25%, and then we started talking about real numbers. So we are getting more reasonable in that, and I think that's a good thing.
That's good. You know, another one of those major topics on your website, and again, we'd encourage people to go there and take a look. They'll get some good information, has to do with the environment. And you made some reference to that when you were talking about agriculture. Tell us some more about your concerns about environmental issues.
Well, I currently chair the Agriculture, Conservation, and Environment Committee, and there are a lot of issues that crop up in that. Certainly, you know, one of the high-profile issues is the Chesapeake Bay, cleaning up our waters, other air quality. And within air quality, you find that there is a debate in terms of energy generation. Virginia being historically a state with a lot of coal and importance in the economy, the coal that's mined. Well, we have to hit, like a lot of things, we have to hit an appropriate balance. So in the energy sector, we've had issues like uranium mining. A large deposit of uranium in the Commonwealth has been located in Pittsylvania County. And we're still debating whether or not it's safe to mine uranium. That debate has softened over the last year or so. We came to a decision that we weren't going to take away the moratorium on uranium mining, and yet the issue is still there because it's such a large economic value to the uranium that's there, and we know that energy generated from nuclear reactors is a very low cost energy, which is can be environmentally safe and very cost efficient. So we can't just say, well, we're not going to do it forever. We have to look at the pros and cons and decide that. Excuse me. But as we grow, population-wise in the Commonwealth, we have more and more of those issues, whether it be from quality of water, quantity of water, which is an issue for the environment, particularly in the Hampton Roads area, as some of the groundwater levels are being depleted, to water levels with what some are calling global warming, whether it be man-made or just natural. It's clear that there are things that we can do to make it ameliorate the situation, I guess, so that we are responsible with the environment.
Another one of the topics, and I'm looking here at some notes that I took down, that was with regards to Medicaid, and just very recently, the Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission did their periodic review of the matters pertaining to the state spending, and Medicaid was one. And let me read what you have on your website and then get you to comment. You said, I don't support a straight expansion of Medicaid. What I do support is a broad-based reform of our healthcare delivery system and a private option insurance plan to provide a more economical way for the uninsured, mostly the working poor, many veterans, and some disabled citizens, to get care rather than showing up at the emergency room. So going back to that one sentence, a broad-based reform of the healthcare delivery. I know that's an issue that you've wrestled with.
Right.
Your colleagues have. All 140 have wrestled with it and come out in different places on it. But do you see work ahead in 2016 to wrestle with that broad-based reform of healthcare?
I see a continuation of work on that. I don't feel that we're going to totally resolve the issue. It gets back to, in terms at the federal level, the Affordable Care Act, and the fact that if we were to expand opportunities for individuals at lower income levels to access Medicaid, then we would be eligible for a significant amount of federal dollars to pay for that. And that's been the debate. The attitude that I've had is that I didn't favor a direct expansion of Medicaid, but I thought that it was a good opportunity for us to basically look at an overhaul of our entire healthcare delivery system. And in doing that, there are a lot of moving parts. Medicaid, Medicare comprise a significant portion of the amount of health care funding that we have in Virginia and throughout the nation. The big problem that we have in health care is that we have a wonderful system that's not readily accessible by everyone, and it's too expensive. It is the most expensive system in the world. I'm talking about the United States now in general, by a large factor. So we really need to focus on figuring out how we can deliver that good health care at an affordable price. And that really is the dilemma we're in. And Medicaid has had issues, and I'll grant that. Virginia historically has had a very modest system for Medicaid, even though it's a big budget driver for us. So one of the things that we'll continue to do this session is to work on additional reforms in the Medicaid delivery system. But we also need to address the operations of our hospitals and how we not only how we pay for health care, but the cost drivers that are out there. So we'll continue to work on that. And I'm hopeful that we can come up with maybe a new plan that will allow us to access those federal dollars. Where I come down on that as a conservative Republican is that the Affordable Care Act is there. It's already taxing Virginia citizens, and we're losing out on a couple $2 billion a year that we could be accessing to provide better health care in Virginia.
And the Medicaid payments right now that is 50% federal and 50% state, I believe, in what we have right now. And so to go along with what you said, that should the Commonwealth decide to pull in extra dollars, it would be at a much more favorable ratio than 50-50.
That's correct. Under the Affordable Care Act, the first 3 years of participation, it's 100%, and then it ratchets down to 90%. Virginia, as you indicated, is a 50% share right now. So we did expand. You know, there's been this notion, well, you absolutely cannot expand Medicaid, but the truth of the matter is that we've been expanding Medicaid every year, and we did this past year, only we didn't do it at 100% federal dollars. We did it with 50% state dollars and 50% federal dollars. We introduced a new program for low-income people with serious mental health deficiencies, and that program is working well, but we could have done it with 100% federal dollars, which, again, those federal dollars we're talking about are dollars that are being taken from Virginia taxpayers to Washington. The issue about the federal budget comes into play in that debate, but I really take exception to that because specifically in this instance we have a revenue flow that's being generated for health care that we're not utilizing.
Well, we'll stay tuned on that issue because
Okay.
I'm sure
Right.
that will be another one. Tax reform, that's another one of the
Right.
topics on your on your website. What do you see happening?
Tax reform, I think, is something that we need to continue to address sometimes in modest ways. But one of the problems that we see right now is our tax system, even though we addressed it in the last decade, to a certain extent, is still antiquated. We basically developed our modern tax system in the late 1920s, and particularly with income tax, very little has changed since then. A lot of emphasis in our general fund on the personal income tax and sales tax, and we really need, I think, to continue to update. The real issue that requires us to take action, in my opinion, is the disparities that we find around the state of the haves and the have-nots. Our system basically does not sufficiently take care of the low-income localities. They have to rely on real estate, and the real estate tax is certainly, or any type of property tax, is the most onerous tax that's out there. Can be the most unfair. As an example of that, the car tax, which many would remember, going back to the Jim Gilmore administration when he was governor with his pledge to do away with the car tax. Well, it was done, but it was done in a very convoluted way, which basically ended up rewarding the more affluent localities that had higher property tax rates on cars, but it was allowed to remain. We didn't do away with it. We got to the point where we were basically returning to local governments about $950 million a year and allowing it to grow. So if for people looking at their car tax bills now, they will say, wait, it's about as big as it ever was. That we're just subsidizing at the state level, taking revenues at the state level and paying back to local governments, not based on any composite of local ability to pay, but just on the fact that people in one area might be more affluent and driving more expensive cars, and they're getting more money from the state because of that.
And those are the areas that probably have the greatest revenue for their schools and their other services.
Indeed. I think, just in general, not to pick on Northern Virginia, but probably 2/3 of that almost $1 billion a year probably goes to Northern Virginia just because of the methodology that was used.
Senator Hanger, we very much appreciate your being on This Week in Richmond, and as the session gets underway, we really want to have you back, and at that time you can tell us what committees you're working on and what's happening with regards to agriculture or the budget or what education, all these important issues. But we really appreciate your service, and thank you for being on This Week
Well, thank
in
you. I
Richmond.
appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com.
Alpha Natural Resources, a leader in mine safety and an environmental steward.
The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community. For jobs, the economy, and public health, Virginia Hospitals, our lifeline.
The Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.